Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Hello, and welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander. My friends, they would tell you I like to ask the hard questions. You know who I am in the group. I'm the person that's saying, okay, I'm going to ask this question, but don't feel like you have to answer it. And now I can be that friend for you too. Today's episode, I'm recording with Michele Reichman. Michele is a woman who wears a lot of hats. She's a person who needs community and connection and support just like any of us. She's a personal trainer and a health coach. She's a mom, a wife, a military spouse. And this episode is so rich with actionable ways real people like Michele, because these are her examples, are going out there and making community and connection. I'm so grateful to everybody who comes on here who has a military background, because I think that the need to make connection is so accelerated when you're having to move around with the military. And in this episode, Michele says that it's not even that community and friendship is nice to have with each of these moves, but it's necessary. She needs people who she can call to watch her kids for an hour or chat about life, have fun as a family. And so when they move, she does all sorts of things to be really intentional about building community and connection, about at least finding a few close friends. And today she's going to share some of those tips. Things like joining your local Facebook groups and using the search bar, joining community organizations, things like that. How she approaches all these moves, the need for community and friendship with her kids, whether she feels like this is an actionable skill set. Spoiler alert, she does. So before I give away the whole episode, let's just dive in. Hi, Michele. How are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited you're here and that we're going to talk about building community when you are moving around the country, kind of that adaptability and resilience of having to make new connections when you've uprooted yourself and your whole family. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about your situation, about where you ended up.
Yeah. So recently, let's do it in months, 5 months ago, we moved from the Midwest to Arizona. So my husband is in the military, so he was a reservist, but this gave him a full-time active job. So it was a really good opportunity for him, but it was a really big move. So we've always lived sort of in the Midwest, like 12 hours from our family. It always felt like that safety net. So this move definitely felt scary. I was also a little scared to live in the desert. I'm like, it's super hot in the summer. We're starting to get there, not quite there yet, but like scorpions, like all the different stuff. So that was a little like, I don't know what we're getting into. So I was really scared to leave my family and be a plane ride away. But it's actually been really good. And it gives me, every time we move, it sort of pushes me to make the opportunity to make connections and make friends here that feel like family, because that's what we really need. And that's what takes away our anxiety and fear, is knowing that we have people that we can call on. So when we moved recently, there's like Facebook groups everywhere. So there's like, our neighborhood has a Facebook group for moms. So I was able to meet some people through there and just asking them like, hey, like there was some post about something that made us have something in common together. And then like, do you want to meet, or we can get the kids together? Or a couple of people I've asked, like, do you just want to go for a walk with me? So it's really taking that first step that feels a little awkward. And I'm very introverted. So I just need like a couple close friends to feel good. But it always feels hard, like asking someone to do something with you. But those people really want that too. Like both of us do. So it's sort of getting over that little awkwardness to start making connections and building friends with somebody.
You're so right. There's actually some paradigm. I'll have to look it up. Studies show that we all assume people don't want to talk to us, aren't interested in like a hello when you're in the coffee shop. But studies show they are. People want that. So if we can just go into our interactions assuming that people do want to connect, we are way more likely to make connections, obviously, but also, I mean, just put ourselves out there. If you have never noticed before that I record my episodes with the guests pretty far in advance from when they're released, well, here's your example, because I didn't know what this was called. I couldn't think of the name at the time of recording. And I have since released a solo episode all about this. So if you go back and you listen to episode 42, this concept is called the liking gap. And it's where studies show we assume people find interactions with us less enjoyable than they do. And I've described this, the easiest way is, if we had an app where you and I interacted, we said hello on the street, and then we turned around and walked away and we both got a notification and it asked us to rate how enjoyable the interaction was. And then it asked us to rate how we did, like how I did in the interaction. And I rated myself a 6. And then we got a notification again that gave me your score. And I remember I rated myself a 6, but maybe you rated this interaction, it was enjoyable, and you give it a 9. So the liking gap there is a 3. We are constantly assuming that other people find interactions less enjoyable than they are. So go listen to episode 42 if you want to dive deeper into the liking gap.
And so I didn't mention I also have 4 kids. So that also
That's
makes
an
the
important
move
part.
harder.
Yeah.
But it also gives me a way to connect with others too. But sort of going off of what you just said, my daughter who is 16, I remember she was feeling scared to ask someone to do something with her. And I'm like, okay, if we flip it, like if they asked you to do the same thing, how would you feel? She's like, I'd be really excited. And we're like, yeah, so her friend would probably feel the same way if she asked her. So, it's that mindset shift it's easier for me to tell my daughter that too, than when we think about ourselves. But we also have to think of how would we feel if someone asked us?
Yeah, that's such a great reminder. I think quite often on this podcast, it comes up of the idea of like, we should just think as if we're kids a little bit more when we're making friends, because you have less of that anxiety. You're just like carefree. It's like, oh, do you want to be my friend? Do you want to go play on the monkey bars? Yes, no? Okay, well, I'm going to go play on the monkey bars. Maybe I'll see you over there. Yeah. And I think that comes up quite often. I love the advice of telling your daughter that.
Yeah. And just this week, someone posted, it was like a local realtor. She was just having this event called Ladies and Latte, just for people to come together. And someone had it's their business where they sell clothes sort of out of like a trailer thing. So it was just a fun little event, and she had coffee, and I was at a spot where not many people were looking at these different clothes, and someone else was there, and I'm like, hey, my name is Michelle. Like, what's your name? And we just talked a little bit. And then after I messaged her on Facebook, like, hey, do you want to walk? And she's like, thank you so much for talking to me. Like, I'm really quiet, but she was just like so grateful that I talked to her. And, it was like good for me too, because I wanted to talk to and meet somebody too.
Another good reminder, this just popped in my head, was like, we always want to be invited to things. We always want to be invited. This is actually a huge reason established friends fight, is if they like aren't invited to something. We always want to be invited. Now, I get not everyone always wants to go. Maybe we're going to say no, but you always want to be invited. You want to be included. And so remembering that when you're nervous about making the invite or initiating the contact, just another way to think about it. I love that she also gave you, I guess, the feedback or the affirmation afterwards of like, thank you for doing that. That's really sweet of her.
Yeah, because it's a little vulnerable. I'm like, yeah, like, I feel awkward too. Like there was a lot of people I didn't talk to at that because maybe they were talking to someone else, but it's just finding those people and just sort of stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah. I also think that I have this thing when I go somewhere new and you have that kind of anxiety, maybe a party or whatever, making that first awkward hello is the worst. The time between when you get there and you make the first hello is when you're overthinking it the most. So I go in with like how fast can I get that awkward period over with? Like just enter some conversation. Because after that, it's so much easier to do it again or bounce around.
Yeah.
So I always try and shorten that awkward beginning time the most.
I love the idea. And it's always hard or when you just feel like you're not talking to anybody and you don't know how to go talk to other people who are in little groups. I always find that hard too.
Yeah. When you joined the Facebook groups when you moved, were there any in particular that you were looking for?
So I first just started with looking for the neighborhood we're in. We live in this really awesome neighborhood and we picked it out strategically.
Yeah.
But the neighborhood, it's like sort of like a small town feel. It's a really big neighborhood, like 20,000 people. So it's like a small town itself. But they really try to build community. And out here in the desert, there's not a lot of like green spaces in neighborhoods. And like a lot of people, you have like rack yards. So this neighborhood has like green spaces and lots of parks every couple blocks. So it's really set up to connect people. And they also have different events within the community. So I looked up the name of the neighborhood and they have a mom's group. So that's been a really good group that I'll like go back in and see what's going on. And there's also a local military group. I don't go on that one as often, but I think always searching like your neighborhood to find local stuff is a good way to go, or something like mom that you have in common, or maybe you like walking or that common interest that you want to find other people that do the same thing.
Yeah. I always like to say it's great when you do that because if you look for that common interest, because then your time spent doing that thing or reading about whatever people are talking about in the Facebook group also suits that interest. So like, even if you didn't make a connection meeting up with someone, you still got to walk, right?
Yeah.
It like takes a little pressure off the interaction and makes it a little more fluid. So you can just like keep going and doing this thing because you like it anyways, or you are interested in it anyways, or it's important to your life either way.
Yeah. And so I am also an online personal trainer and health coach. So I started a local boot camp class. It's not like a hardcore boot camp, but that has been another good way to use something I like to meet new people. And it's nice because people in there are making friends with each other.
Yeah.
So it's really fun to see other people start to make friends with someone who's also health-minded. Because if you're on a health journey, sometimes if you're not around people who aren't health-minded, it can be hard. So it's fun to see other people in the class coming back and making friends and community too.
Yeah, and encouraging each other and being able to like support each other in this goal they have. Yeah. When you're in the groups, do you have any parameters on yourself or a mindset, like how much you're engaging in the group? As in, I think, right, in order to actually actively want to make community and use these Facebook groups as a tool, a lot of people are going to join and just kind of watch. So are you trying to like actively post and engage? Like, how do you pick what you're doing in there, I guess?
Yeah, I try not to spend too much time on social media for my personal life. So I use it more strategically. So I might go into the group and search something, like if I'm looking for a local school or something like that, you use the search function in the bar and then you can see posts and you can search like most recent ones. So I do that. And maybe every once in a while, I'll go into the group and just scroll the recent things and see if anything interests, or I will make a post. Like I just posted, my daughter wants to go into the psychology field. She's still in high school, but I asked, like, is there anybody who's a counselor in here that could talk with her? So people might reply to that. So I might post different things, but I try not to scroll too much because if you're really just scrolling, you're not going to get anything out of it. But you can find events or different things. that you're looking for.
I like the search. I've never thought about that. And I think it's genius, right? Because I talk a lot about when you were saying like the walking group or your health group. If you can kind of think about what you want out of certain connections, like what you're looking for, what you'd like to do with your time, you can filter. So a search is literally a filter. Like that's such a great way to take those big, overwhelming groups and not get caught up in them or overwhelmed. Maybe overwhelmed might be another way.
Yeah, because I mean, you could spend a lot of time in there just looking and reading through people's, but if it's not going to apply to you in a way that's going to help you or you're going to take any action, then it gets to be the time waster.
Yeah. So it really sounds like there's a focus on you finding connections. And I think a question a lot of people might have is, are you doing something similar to find, say, like families want other similar families to hang out with, or couples or kids? Are you actively doing any of that? Or are you kind of going with the mindset of, if you find some connections that will help find those other ones later?
Yeah, so I would say like a little bit of both. So I think being a mom, it's a little easier to like, hey, do you have kids? We can all get together. Like that's a little bit easier. Like, as I said the other day when I met someone and asked them to go for a walk, that's almost a little harder. Like when it's just a friend for yourself, I don't know why. That must be a mind block thing. And the other way, we've gotten involved with our church and they have small groups. So we were really looking at churches that had good communities because then you can get connected. Me and my husband go to the small group together and we get connected with other couples and other families. So that has been a big help too. And then also trying to, especially my oldest daughter, she is homeschooled. So that was another thing I use the Facebook groups for, like, who else has homeschooled teens here? And like trying to connect her with those other people and doing that for her. The younger kids, they're in school, so it's a little bit easier to find people at school. And the other nice thing here is like the yards are really small, like I was saying. So a lot of the kids will go out and play at the parks or in the front yards. So it's a little bit easier, I feel like, for the kids to meet other neighbors around because the kids are out playing. And we were here during the winter, which is the nice season. And then also me just trying to meet some of our neighbors and connect with them too.
Yeah, I mean, that is a perk to being in the desert and being where it's warm, at least in the winter.
Yes.
In the Pacific Northwest, I live in Seattle. So there's a lot of talk about how hard it is to make friends in the winter here because everybody's inside and that everybody can't wait for summer because when you're outside moving around, you bump into more people, you see more neighbors. I really think, honestly, just thinking about that is maybe a good thing to acknowledge, like using that time, being really intentional of when everybody is outside in the winter in the desert. Like this is the time to go out and meet my neighbors instead of being like, oh, I'll do it later.
Yeah. Or it's like sitting on your front porch instead of your back porch.
Yeah. So you said you've been there for about 5 months.
5 months. Yeah.
How would you say it's going?
Yeah, so I would actually say it's going really well. Like I said at the beginning, I was pretty scared to move all the way across the country and into the desert. And then the kids really didn't want to leave their friends, but we all have really settled in well. Like the winter is amazing here. I told my husband, I'm like, we're going to have to be snowbirds. Like, I get this. Like, it's so nice to be able to be outside. And I feel like it took us a while to find a church that we liked and a church community, but we found that. And it takes a while just to transition and settle in, get the kids in school, like find some sports. Like there's just a lot of different things, not just for myself, but as the family as a whole. But I would say it's gone really well. Like I have made a couple friends already. And the other thing I would like to add is staying connected with old friends. So where we lived before, I had a really good friend and we would always walk and pray together, typically once a week. And if we couldn't do it in person, sometimes we would do it on the phone if it was raining or something like that. So we have still done that. So obviously it's on the phone all the time now, but still being able to stay connected to her has been really important because especially if you're someone who moves a lot or even it just gets really easy to let friends go and forget to call them because we get busy or we're trying to make new friends or do different things. But keeping those old friends, I think, is also really important because I have that person I can still talk deeper to right now,
Yes.
while I'm still making these newer friends that I may not feel as comfortable sharing some
Yeah.
deeper stuff with.
Like that older friend, you've built that friendship and it serves a very important need in your life. So like continuing to appreciate that and participate in that. And I'm sure you fill an important need for your friend that you moved away from.
Yes, definitely.
When you meet with that friend, is it like a consistent scheduled thing, or do you just touch base once a week and kind of see where it goes? How do you keep it
Yes.
consistent?
It does get a little tricky because we just walk and talk on the phone, typically on the weekends, but sometimes there's like weekends where we're traveling. So there's been like a couple weekends where it's been missed, but then we'll try to text each other, send a voice message about what's going on. But usually towards the end of the week, like today, she texted me and was like, "Hey, are you available Saturday?" Like, and gives me a couple times. So one of us tries to do that. And I also remember when we first started doing this, I felt like I was always the one who texted her to ask. But she'd always be like, "I forgot, like, thanks for texting me." And I feel like lately, like, she's been the one texting me, and I'm so glad she does. So I just want to say that because sometimes we feel like we're always the one that has to reach out. And it doesn't necessarily mean that person doesn't want to.
No, yeah. Sometimes it's just like capacity, or
Yeah.
I talk sometimes about how I think like I go through phases. Sometimes I'm the initiator,
Yeah.
and I have friends who like are never the initiator, but if I really think about it, they do other things. Like they always plan everything. So I might initiate it, but then I kind of just forget about it and they always plan it. So really we're both bringing a skill, even though it's not like the exact same thing. For me, I think that kind of equals it out. Everybody might not, but I think it is a way to like show you are still like investing something into this friendship equally. Now, being in the military, do you know how long you're going to be in your location? Does that change anything for you?
Yeah, just living in uncertainty.
Yeah.
So yeah, with this one, like his job, the contract, whatever they want to call it, was only for like 9, 10-ish months. But most likely the military will extend it, but waiting for funding, like it's the way the job is slotted. So a little bit of like, we have no idea how long we'll be here. And that's sort of hard, like when you have kids and the different grades they're in. So I honestly just try not to think of that too much because I know whatever happens, like we will be okay. Like we are resilient, we are adaptable, but hopefully, most likely, I'm hoping we'll be here at least a few years and potentially it could be longer, but it will be that like waiting for things to get approved. And if anybody knows the military, that is never fast.
I will send all my good thoughts to you that extends for a while. Cause I'm sure it's so nice to have a little bit of stability for a period of time. And, I just have to applaud you because it sounds like when you moved, you knew this was a big priority for you and your family to build community there. And a lot of people, the example that comes to mind that I hear a lot is people will tell me sometimes when life really starts to shake up in like your late 20s ish, that maybe people are losing friends or people are moving away. And then they'll say, well, you know what? It's fine. I'll just wait to make friends until next life marker. And a lot of times what I hear is like, I'll wait until I can make mom friends, or I think I might get a new job in a different city and I'll just wait until then. And that like perpetual waiting is hard. Like it's lonely, number one, but then I think it just adds even more pressure when you hit that milestone. Like what happens if you move to this new city and the new job has you working wild hours and then suddenly 2 years pass and you haven't made a single friend in this new city. So I really applaud you for just going for it, even though you don't know.
Yeah. And I really do feel like, because I know that I'm going to have less anxiety, I'm going to feel better if we make connections and friends when we move. So it really was one of the top priorities when we moved. And it doesn't have to be a ton of people. Because again, I'm an introvert. I'm good with like a few good people, but still, even I want to keep expanding and reaching out to other people too. So yeah, it definitely was a top priority.
Yeah. I have this phrase I say, which is building yourself a support system is the ultimate self-care. It's like the foundation that allows you to do all the other things in your life. You know, if something goes bad, you have people to call for health reasons or mental health or to, feed you or just knowing you have someone makes such a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's why I felt like scared to be like a plane ride away from my family because where we lived before, even if it was the 12 hours, when we lived 12 hours from my mom, like I knew she could drive and get there in a day.
Yeah.
But now with the plane ride, that's more complicated. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, she can still fly out here if I really need her. But we're going to also obviously build connections here too and find people we can trust and know.
Yeah, even if it's people that feel like that interim until she could get there for a longer period of time, any of it is valuable.
Yeah.
And you said earlier in the episode, like trying to build those friends that feel like family. Are there any traits or actions or activities or things? Like, I think that's different for a lot of people, what that would mean. What do you think that means maybe to like you and your family?
Yeah, I think just a family who would have, similar values to what we had, maybe how we're raising our kids. That's probably more who I tend to gravitate to. And those would be the people who I would trust if like something came up and I needed them to watch our kids. And also like the similar interests. So the couple of friends I've made, like I walk with all of them.
Yeah.
But that's like an easy thing to like ask someone to do for me. So I think finding those similar values.
I love that. I just think it's, people say that like friends like family, and it's just so different for everyone. And I think if that's something you're looking for, right, it's just good to like have a sense of what that would feel like to you.
Yeah.
Kind of always having that idea of what you're building towards in these connections, what you're hoping for, like what it looks like. Because if you don't, then you're just walking around taking a bunch of actions and like not even knowing what would feel right. You just might be on autopilot and end up somewhere where you're like, this isn't really what I wanted.
Yeah. And where we used to live before, we lived there about 5 years, but our one neighbors, a husband and wife, they were about the same age as my parents. And they loved our kids. And they were like grandparents to our kids. So there's also like different types of relationships and things too. And I really like enjoyed having them as neighbors because I knew they really like enjoyed our kids. We enjoyed having them and we trusted them. And obviously they were right by our house too.
That is maybe my favorite example of this whole episode. Because I talk about this all the time. Like people have to move around or different life circumstances, like things come up and there are so many people, people of a different generation that wish their grandkids were close or wish that their kids were close. And if they did look around their neighborhood, maybe they would find a family that wants that kind of connection because they don't have their grandparents close or their parents close. That's such a beautiful example of how you can build these like supportive connections wherever you are.
Yeah. So it may not be the exact person or thing you have in mind, but if we think of like families as a whole or how like community functions, it's different ages, different people and different things.
Yes. I mean, that's why for as many marketing people who have told me to niche down in this podcast, I refuse because if I'm just I don't know, telling a bunch of millennial women to befriend millennial women, then like, what about the men? What about people of different generations, older generations that wish they had that family feeling? What about kids that need aunt and uncle type support? Or like, yeah, it's all connected. And people just want, like they want those connections. It's pretty simple. People want to feel connected.
Yeah, different types of support too. At a different time, when my older kids were younger, I did a MOPS group. So it's like mothers of preschoolers. But it was really good to meet with other moms. And then I remember as my oldest was getting older, it was like I really wanted to know like moms who had older kids than me.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to learn from them or hear from them or like ask them questions. So having those different, I don't know if that's quite generations, but you know, that different age, different stages of life.
Yeah, just like a slightly different perspective, maybe. As people who you could say, was that transition to middle school hard? What happened with your kiddo? Anything I should think about or be anticipating? Yeah, I think that's a very real thing to want. And then you're having to go out and find that and build that and connect with new people, whether it's in your church or at the playground or in a Facebook group, but like having some intentional idea of the types of people you want to look for. I love that. Man, you've really been doing this intentionally for a while.
Yeah. And honestly, if my husband wasn't in the military, and so we got married as soon as I got out of college. So maybe I think I was 23 because I have my master's in physical therapy. And as soon as I graduated, I moved to Arkansas with him. And obviously didn't have any kids yet, but I was working. So I was able to make some friends through there. And then, you know, once we had our daughter, then we moved after that. But it forced me to be intentional and get better at this. So that probably started, I'm 41 now. So it's been a while. So I feel like it's definitely gotten easier. And it's definitely a skill you can grow, whether you feel like that's like not you.
Yeah. Do you feel like when you move, every time you move now, I mean, it kind of sounds like you do, but I don't want to assume, like you just kind of trust that you have this skill and you will find what you need. Like it's sad to leave what you had behind. Surely that's always sad, but also it's going to be okay. You just like trust yourself that you can do this.
Yeah, I know that I can meet people. And I think, I mean, the way Facebook has grown, like it is really nice when you move. Like, you know, there's ups and downs to social media, but that has helped and made it easier than what it was when we first went in the military. There was Facebook, but it wasn't what it is today. And that's not how you had to meet people in person. And so that was a little bit harder. So the whole internet has definitely helped make it easier. But I do feel confident and I do have just faith that it's going to be okay. I can do this. You know, things sort of always work out when you're putting that effort in.
Technology is a tool that we can use for our friendships. There are so many different apps and resources. I mean, simply video calls, text messages, but then you have things like Voxer or Marco Polo. Yet in Facebook groups where we can use the search bar to search for the types of friends and people and activities that we want to connect with. We have so much opportunity at our fingertips. And it's just how we choose to use these tools in our lives to actually take action and build the friendships you want. Find the connections that feel right. I don't know about you, but I'm going to take a second and just audit the tools that I do have and whether I'm using them. What's on my phone right now that I downloaded at some point and have completely forgotten about? Because maybe it would help me out in one of my friendships. Maybe it would make it a little easier. And if it's not an app, maybe it's simply just putting time in my calendar to send the text messages, respond to everything, reaching out and scheduling consistent phone calls or FaceTimes. I think it's really empowering to feel like no matter what life throws at you, you can build connections that you need. And I don't think that's a very common thing. I think a lot of people don't feel that way. But when you do, it's like you have this superpower. I really feel that way. I think so. That's how I felt when I realized I had that skill set
Yeah.
after a really big life transition that left me crying for days and like sad at everything changing. I truly hope that it's like part of my reason for doing this. I want everyone to feel that way.
Yeah. And I will say, like, it's not like I was confident the whole time. I said I was scared to move and like, you still have some of those fears and worries, but it's like you have that overall arching, like, I can do this. It's going to be fine. You might have to work through your fears a little bit, but really knowing in your heart that it's going to be okay.
Are there any maybe parts that are hard all the time? Kind of like you already know they're going to be hard, but you know there's something good on the other side? Or maybe parts that make you really anxious, or, you know what I'm saying? Like there's like a lot of resistance. You have to like push through maybe showing up in person or.
Yeah. I think my biggest, I don't know if this is quite what you're getting at, but my biggest fear was just like, well, what if something happens to me or the kids or my husband and we need help? Like, it would be the time you like call your mom an emergency. Like, what are we going to do? So that was like probably my biggest fear moving this far, is just knowing that you're not going to have anybody to call like at first, or, till you make those connections. So that was probably my biggest fear. But yeah, in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, my mom will fly out here. And pretty soon we were able to meet our neighbors. And, not that they were super close right away, but knowing that there was a couple people like, hey, we would call and people probably would want to help. Like, people are generally nice. And I feel especially around military bases, if people even aren't military, they're just really friendly and really nice and want to help people too.
Yeah. I mean, they're probably like, wow, you moved across the country. You did it. And I'm happy to be here for you. Yeah. It probably almost sets like an expectation of these people probably need somebody who might come over and like, I can totally do that. That's not hard to come over and watch the kids for an hour in an emergency.
Yeah.
Sure. I mentioned this, it made me think in a previous episode I did with a friend of mine. They don't live close to any immediate family. Like before they had kids, they moved away from immediate family. They've settled in the Seattle area and they considered moving back towards family. But the truth is, like, they really love it here and they have built this thriving life here. And then they had kids and that changed a lot of their friendships. And they're so close to a lot of people, but they've been really intentionally building like community for their family, not just the friendships maybe they have individually. And I am very close with her. We talk all the time and I know their kids. I've spent time with their family, but it's not like I am the closest person to them, maybe. But they asked me one day, they were like, we need to put down an emergency contact at our kids' school. We trust you. I think you would handle an emergency really well. Our kids would recognize you and know you and like know your name and you would be familiar. Can we put you down as their emergency contact? And I was like, that is such a beautiful way to show how like an intentional ask. Like I think a lot of people will be really overwhelmed by that, but well, not to make the ask. But for me on the receiving end, it's like, okay, so if something ever happened, right? This isn't some big regular time commitment. Like if something ever happened, of course I would go get their kids and pick them up and take care of them. Like, yes, I would go get them. That's what that made me think of like, there really are ways, even though maybe I'm not their all encompassing person, I can't replace their parents necessarily, but that is something I can do for them as a friend.
Yeah. My husband did 8 years active duty, and then he got out of the military so he could go to nursing school. He wasn't going to be able to do it and stay in. So he went to nursing school and was doing the reserves. So during that time, we chose to move back by my family. And he still had to commute then to his reserve weekends. So he had to go away for like 3 days every month. And that's on top of when he was in school or then when he had a full-time job. And it was a lot. And really living by family just like wasn't what we expected.
Yeah. I've heard this too. This is a common thing on this podcast. Yes.
It wasn't what we expected. And then it was like we were living away from a military base and the reserve weekend days just add up or there's extra things here and there. So, a minimum of 50 days a year, he was gone on top of a full-time job. And it was just a lot. And we're like, what are we doing? So we moved by our own choice to move closer to a base. And it was a good decision, but I had that in me, like, we're still only 5 hours away from my family and we'll be able to make friends and have what we need there. And our life is going to be so much easier because he's not going to have to be gone for the weekends. It'll be like a normal job, where he goes 8 to 5 and he's back home. So we did have that transition too.
Yeah, which I'm sure was a hard choice and is one many, many people have made. And also one that a lot of people, when they hear that, are going to be like, I can't believe you moved away from, your family. Your family was there. And some people have just like so much support. Not to say you didn't, but like sometimes no matter how much support you have from your family, it can't make up for the fact that it's creating these circumstances where your husband's gone for so long. Like you just really have to look at the overall picture and then trust that you can make a community for yourself.
Yeah. And with that one, it's like, well, if it doesn't work out, we'll come back. But it was good. And we ended up staying there for 5 years till we came here. So,
man, you have done it. The things that I talk about in this podcast, this is such a beautiful example of just making the decision and like allowing the time and space and being intentional, like slowly building what you need for this season of your life and your family in this moment. And like checking in on that all the time. Similar way with the example of like finding parents who are a little older, even just like these slight shifts. You did this on your own, but I'm like, look, it's possible.
Yeah. And I don't think I would have done that if it really wasn't for being a military spouse. Like if we just lived wherever we lived, I don't think I would have developed these skills and this reach. Like my sister, she's a little more talkative, quite a bit more talkative and extroverted than me. And she could always make friends easier. But now as we're adults, I feel like I probably have more skills in making friends and how do you get connected in a community when you move than she does because I've had to do it. And I know that's like what I need to sort of function good.
Yeah. With each move, are you finding that your kids are developing those skills? Like, is it getting any easier for them? Kids, this is so hard for kids to move all the time. I get that.
Yeah. And especially my oldest, she's 16 now. So she's probably moved the most. But I do see this like confidence in her. And she's pretty like quiet and introverted too. But she has developed more skills in going up and talking to people. Or like I gave that example of like asking someone to go do something when she felt awkward. And especially moving here, like she's just been up for it. And I think she knows like she needs some friends too. And I think it's hard with teenagers a little bit. Everyone's different. Like she's not on social media, like in all of that. And it's hard when, kids are just on their screen and they do different things. But again, through me finding people in the Facebook groups, like, does anyone have a team? Connecting them, or through our church, she's been going to like a youth group and a Bible study. So she's made friends then, but she's still teaching her, like, you have to also ask them to do something like outside of that group or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, it's really beautiful because you're modeling the behavior. Like you are also doing it. And then this is obviously a value for your family. So it's something that you're prioritizing and you're helping her with. You're like having discussions around. There's just so many pieces here that are trickling down and giving your kids this skill set that you had to teach yourself. They're just like learning as they grow up.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have it forever.
Yeah. And especially my next oldest is 12 and he's a boy and he did not want to move this time. He's like, didn't want to leave his friends. And he's the one that's a little more like high strung. And when we got here, he's like, I'm not making any friends because he didn't want to lose them or leave them.
Yeah.
So for a little, I don't know how long it was, a month. I don't want to quite say 2. He was like, I'm not going to make friends. But then he loves to play outside and go to the basketball court. So he has made friends and he's playing with them now. So he will remember this move now that he's older and he'll be able to take that piece with him. Like there's a couple friends he still stays in contact with from where we lived before. But now he's also knows he can make new friends. And it is sad to leave friends. And like, that's okay for him to be sad too.
Yeah. I mean, it is sad. And as adults, sometimes it's sad because we choose to move. And sometimes it's sad because our friends choose to move. And then we're left, needing to find somebody else to go on walks with or play outside basketball with, whatever it is. Yeah. So like we don't always get to pick. And I think it's such an important skill that whether we choose or somebody else made a choice that is now impacting us, we can be sad and then we can go find what we need later.
Yes.
When you were saying that your son keeps in contact with friends from your previous location and you said he's 12, is there anything that you're doing to like facilitate that?
I am not. So we did finally get him a kid-friendly phone. Like he didn't have a phone and he was pretty upset when we left that. He's like, I don't have a phone. I can't like keep in contact with people. But he got his one friend's phone number and then the other one is like through kids' Facebook Messenger, which he has to use my phone for because he doesn't have like apps on his phone.
Yeah.
But no, he has done that himself because I'll sort of see the messages that he'll send. And like boys just don't really like talk that much. Like their conversations aren't much of nothing, but that's, I think, pretty normal for most boys that age.
Yeah. I mean, he still feels connected. It was probably the same conversations or similar he would have in person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a friend who realized a few years ago that she is the gatekeeper for her kids' friendships, right? Like her kids didn't have technology. So if her kids wanted to see their friends quite often outside of school, it was, Mom, can I see my friends? And then her having to do the work. And then the in-between times, the kid has no way to initiate. So I just always like to ask that question because I think it is a really interesting thing. I think it's a beautiful skill you're teaching your kids to like stay in contact because quite often, right, you make friends, I call them friends of proximity at school, as your neighbors, church, the places you frequent as adults at work. And that's how a lot of people make friends. But when people move, right, like you and your friend doing the walks and talks, like I think it's really beautiful to give kids sometimes ways to learn that as a kid.
Yeah.
So that you don't wake up one day in your 30s, 40s, 50s, moving away from your closest people and you've never had to really think about how to intentionally stay connected if you really care about them.
Yeah. And I will say, like, my husband is like terrible at that.
Yep.
And it's probably a little bit more of a guy thing and then just him too. But he's horrible about staying in contact with his like old friends from high school and college. And then he'll like sort of complain about it. But I'm like, you don't ever message them, text them, or call them. And there's like a real disconnect in his mind. And he's almost like, I know I need more people around me. Like he's not quite as much like that. So there's a difference there, but it is interesting because he's probably like the complete opposite of me. But he'll go along with if I'm gathering something. He's definitely not that initiator either. So if I gather something, or like he would be super excited if someone asked him to do something too.
Yeah. I have a lot of episodes in the works about men's friendships, and your husband's example aligns with all the things. And I am obviously going to record like 20 episodes on this, if not more. But the very short thing is society really tells everyone that your family's social wellness is women's work. Like guys are not encouraged that that's like their duty, even to facilitate their own. So that's like a really common thing. And I think a lot of guys aren't even aware of it.
Yeah.
So, it's just maybe bringing awareness to start and then having people see that it is a skill set. Because I hear this story, this is very similar.
Yeah.
I hear it all the time.
Yeah. And he's like supportive or encouraging of me making friends. But, and granted, I have an online business, so I work from home, and he is in person with other people. So he does get.
Yeah. It's not to say that he doesn't have friends. He has work friends probably, and he does have those old friends. They just don't stay in contact, which can be hard when you want to reconnect sometimes. So it is socialized in a certain way currently. And hopefully we can start to see it and like change that in future generations so that we're not repeating this.
Yeah.
Let's hope that someday your son has a thriving community of friends and like has this skill set someday. Yeah.
Yeah. Like as you were saying that's what I was thinking. Like, okay, he's automatically texting or messaging his friends without me doing it. So he is doing better already at 12. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really think it is a shift that as many guys as I can get to hear this now that are interested and want to change. But if nothing else, I hope that the next generation isn't under this guise that they can't also build these connections for themselves.
Yeah. And, I think that guy to guy conversation is going to be different than a lot of girl to girl conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Like it might be more topical, and that's okay to like send a message to a guy friend and it be something short and sweet, but it helps you to stay connected with them.
It just helps you stay connected. And I say this all the time, like the only shot of a more connected or vulnerable conversation is if they start talking. So if they start talking about the topical, the interests, the sports, the golf, the house, the yard, the work, whatever. If that's what it takes to get the conversation started, if they don't even start it, it will never get to a deeper question. So, instead of harping on how like, well, you're not really talking to them about anything. It's like, well, if they don't start talking, there's no shot.
Yeah, there's that. The start of the conversation is always more topical.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think guys get it's like well, do you even really need to talk to him about that? Because it's not even that important. And then they don't. And then it just like perpetuates the cycle. Again, more episodes, but.
Yeah. One of my friends, her husband is very talkative and extroverted, but he has a couple friends there. They use like one of those like walkie-talkie type apps.
Yeah.
So they're like, connected through that. So I think that's really cool too.
I love that. I've been trying to get more people in my life onto those apps because I think they help with some of those just like random things I would love to tell them if I saw them more frequently than I do.
Yeah.
Little shifts we can make to try and, again, like maybe not build new connections, but keep the ones we do really love alive. And that can look like weekly walks or walkie-talkie apps or random 12-year-old boy text message threads.
Yes,
whatever
like poop
it is.
Emojis. I think they do some of that.
Yeah, well, it's got to start somewhere, right?
Yes.
It's not what I want to send, but
yes.
Who am I to judge? I'm not a 12-year-old boy. Michele, if somebody was thinking about packing it up and moving, is there any final words of, I don't know, advice or thoughts, something you would tell a friend who's thinking about doing this?
Yeah, I think if you are confident, and it doesn't have to be 100% confident, but if that's like where you're supposed to be and you know that's where you need to be in your life right now, is to go for it and work on, just like we talked, how can you get those connections as quickly as you can? So whenever we move, we don't have a ton of things that we hang up in the house, but I try to do it right away because it's like, if we're only going to be here for a year, like I want to get that hung up in the house, because I know some people who I've met that have moved, that's like a year and they haven't like hung up things in their house. So it's the same idea with friends, is like, try to do that as quickly as you can. Find that Facebook group, those local events, like whatever it is that you know you're more likely to get connected, and spend that time doing those things, and make sure you leave that time in your schedule to put time into that, because it does take some time.
I am going to forever use that analogy and credit it to you because it's so perfect. I'm the same way. I want to get the stuff on the walls because otherwise, what even was the point?
Yeah.
Michele, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. This turned into such a beautiful conversation, I think, with so many gems for people who are either moving around or just people who have lived somewhere for a while and want to be more connected in their community and for their family or for themselves. This is I think the second episode I've done where people have talked about how impactful Facebook groups are for making friends. And I have never used Facebook groups for making local connections. Maybe that's a good way to put it. I've definitely used it for making business connections, but I feel a little inspired. I feel like I need to go give this a test run. Join a couple groups, pop in there, use the search bar, see what I can find. Even if it's just for simple connections. Because I think that was such an actionable tip. I mean, this whole episode was full of actionable tips. Things that you might try or not. And if you do, reach out, let us know. Love to know what you give a try, what works, what feels weird, feels sticky, what feels awkward, what you try a second time. Let us know. Until next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.